The dust cloud on the horizon wasn't from cattle. Olivia pressed her face against the stagecoach window, watching the amber plume rise against the blazing Arizona sky. Something cold settled in her stomach as the driver's whip cracked harder, urging the horses faster toward Fort Brennan. She clutched the worn letter in her gloved hands, the letter that had brought her 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she'd never met. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Apache war party struck just as the fort's bell tower came into view. 3 weeks earlier, Olivia Whitmore had stood in the cramped boarding house room in Philadelphia, reading the same letter for the 100th time. The paper was already soft from folding and unfolding, the ink slightly smeared from her nervous fingers. "Miss Whitmore," it began in careful script. "My name is Captain Marcus Donnelly, stationed at Fort Brennan in the Arizona Territory. I am writing in response to your advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer regarding matrimonial correspondence." She remembered placing that advertisement with trembling hands, using her last $2. Respectable young woman, 22, seeks marriage arrangement with a gentleman of good character, experienced in household management and children's education, willing to relocate. What the advertisement hadn't mentioned was her desperation. Her father's debts had consumed everything after his death 6 months ago. The boarding house landlady, Mrs. Garrett, had already extended her patience beyond reason. Without prospects for marriage or employment that paid enough to survive, the frontier beckoned as her only escape from destitution. Captain Donnelly's subsequent letters painted a picture of life at Fort Brennan, a remote outpost in Apache territory where soldiers and their families carved out existence from the harsh desert landscape. He wrote of sunrise over red mesas, of the challenge and purpose found in protecting settlers moving west, of his hope for a family to call his own. "I must be honest about my circumstances," his 4th letter had read. "A rifle ball took my left leg below the knee at Antietam. I walk with a crutch now, and some might say I'm half the man I once was. But I own a small house near the fort, I receive my pension, and I can provide for a wife. What I cannot provide is a pretense about the hardships you would face here." His honesty had moved her more than flowery promises might have. In a world where men often deceived women about their situations, Marcus Donnelly offered truth. She wrote back immediately, accepting his proposal. Now bouncing in the stagecoach across the endless expanse of New Mexico territory, Olivia wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The other passenger, a traveling salesman named Herbert Finch, had spent the better part of 2 days regaling her with horrific tales of Apache raids, scalping parties, and the general lawlessness of the territories. "No place for a refined lady like yourself," he'd insisted, mopping sweat from his balding head with a grimy handkerchief. "These frontier soldiers, they're desperate men. Half of them are running from something back east. The other half have been out here so long they've gone savage themselves." Olivia had tried to ignore his warnings, but doubt crept in with each mile. What did she really know about Marcus Donnelly beyond his letters? What if Herbert Finch was right about frontier? Desperation driving men to deception. The stagecoach hit a particularly violent rut, throwing her against the window. Outside, the landscape had gradually transformed from the familiar greens of home to an alien world of red rock, sagebrush, and endless sky. The mountains in the distance looked like broken teeth against the horizon. Everything seemed designed to make a person feel small and vulnerable. "Should reach Fort Brennan by late afternoon," called down Jake Morrison, the driver, during their noon stop to water the horses. He was a weathered man with kind eyes who'd driven this route for 15 years. "Captain Donnelly's a good man, miss. You needn't worry about that." His reassurance helped, though Olivia couldn't shake her nervousness. She'd brought her entire life in 2 carpet bags and a small trunk. her mother's china, a few books, her best dresses, and the small savings she'd managed to preserve from her father's creditors. Everything she owned was strapped to the back of this stagecoach, carrying her toward a future she could barely imagine. As they resumed their journey, Olivia found herself studying her reflection in the window. She'd always been considered pretty. In Philadelphia, auburn hair, green eyes, fair complexion that she protected carefully with bonnets and gloves. But out here, under this relentless sun, she felt herself wilting like a flower transplanted to foreign soil. The afternoon heat grew oppressive. Herbert Finch had fallen asleep, his mouth hanging open as he snored softly. Olivia tried to read, but the constant motion made her queasy. Instead, she watched the landscape roll by and tried to imagine her new life. Marcus had written about the house he'd prepared for them. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, a small garden plot, and windows, facing east toward the sunrise. He'd described evening walks around the fort's perimeter, Sunday services in the small chapel, and the tight-knit community of military families who looked out for one another. But he'd also written honestly about the dangers. Apache raids were a constant threat. Supply wagons sometimes never arrived. The nearest doctor was a 3-day ride to Tucson. Women gave birth with only the help of other women. Children died from diseases that would be treatable back east. The territory tests everyone, one of his letters had said. Some people discover strength they never knew they possessed. Others find they're not suited for this life. There's no shame in either outcome, but it's important to know who you are. Before it's too late, Olivia hoped she was the former, but honestly didn't know. She'd lived a sheltered life in Philadelphia, the daughter of a moderately successful merchant. Her biggest challenges had been managing household staff and organizing charity events for her father's church. How would she handle Apache raids and prairie fires and all the other threats Marcus had mentioned? The stagecoach began climbing into foothills dotted with strange cacti and scrub brush. The air grew thinner and somehow cleaner, carrying scents she didn't recognize. Sage and creosote and something that might have been wild flowers. Despite her nervousness, Olivia found the landscape strangely beautiful. There was a vastness here that made her feel both insignificant and somehow more alive. "There she is," Jake called down, pointing ahead with his whip. Fort Brennan sat on a rise overlooking a valley where a small river twisted through cottonwood trees. The fort itself was smaller than Olivia had imagined. A collection of adobe buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade with a few scattered houses nearby. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could see tiny figures moving around the compound. Her heart began racing. Somewhere down there was Marcus Donnelly, the man she'd agreed to marry based on nothing but letters and hope. In a few minutes, she'd meet him face to face for the first time. What if they didn't suit each other? What if the chemistry that had developed through their correspondence didn't translate to real life? "Looks quite enough," Herbert Finch said, waking from his nap. He peered out the window and grunted. "Course, that's when the Apaches like to strike. When everyone's relaxed and not paying attention." Olivia wished he would stop talking about Apache raids. She had enough to worry about without adding fears of violent death to her list of concerns. As they approached the fort, she could make out more details. The buildings were sturdy but basic, designed for function rather than beauty. A few women hung laundry on lines behind the houses. Children played in the dusty streets. Soldiers walked patrol routes along the palisade walls. It looked like the kind of place where people worked hard and watched out for each other, exactly as Marcus had described. That gave her some comfort, though her stomach still fluttered with nervous energy. The stagecoach rolled through the fort's main gate, past a guard who tipped his hat politely. Jake brought the horses to a stop in front of what appeared to be the main administrative building. Dust settled around them as the sound of hoofbeats and creaking leather faded away. "End of the line, folks," Jake announced, climbing down from his perch. Fort Brennan, Arizona Territory. Olivia took a deep breath and gathered her courage. Through the window, she could see people emerging from nearby buildings, drawn by the arrival of the stagecoach. Mail and supplies from the outside world were always noteworthy events in places like this, but she didn't see anyone who might be Marcus Donnelly. Her letters had described him as tall with dark hair and a beard, but she realized now how inadequate such descriptions were. Half the men in sight could match that general description. Herbert Finch was already climbing out, muttering about the heat and dust. Jake opened the door on Olivia's side and extended his hand to help her down. "Thank you," she said, accepting his assistance. Her legs felt unsteady after days of travel, and the high altitude made her slightly dizzy. "Captain Donnelly should be along directly," Jake assured her. "Probably just finishing up some business. These military men, they're always dealing with one crisis or another." Olivia nodded and tried to look composed while her heart hammered against her ribs. Around her, the fort buzzed with late afternoon activity. She caught curious glances from soldiers and civilians alike. News of the captain's mail-order bride had apparently spread through the small community. A woman approached from one of the nearby houses, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and greying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be Miss Whitmore," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. My husband's the quartermaster here. Marcus asked me to watch for the stage." "It's so nice to meet you," Olivia replied, grateful for the friendly welcome. "Is Captain Donnelly—" "He's coming," Sarah assured her. "Had to finish briefing a patrol that just came in. Apache sign spotted about 20 miles south, so everyone's a bit on edge. Nothing unusual, mind you, just the normal precautions we take around here." The mention of the Apache sign made Olivia's stomach tighten, but she tried not to show her alarm. This was her life now. She needed to learn to cope with such realities. "Let's get you out of this sun," Sarah continued. "You look ready to wilt. Poor dear. The heat takes some getting used to." As Sarah led her toward a shaded area near the building, Olivia heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She turned and saw a man walking toward them, tall, dark-haired, with a neatly trimmed beard. He moved with a slight limp, leaning on a wooden crutch, but his bearing was unmistakably military. Marcus Donnelly was more handsome than she'd expected, with intelligent blue eyes and a strong jaw. But what struck her most was his expression, nervous. Anticipation mixed with something that might have been hope. Their eyes met across the dusty courtyard, and Olivia felt a flutter of something that wasn't entirely fear. This was the man she'd agreed to marry, the stranger who'd offered her salvation from destitution and despair. He approached slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind and climb back into the stagecoach. When he reached her, he removed his hat and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying a slight Irish accent she hadn't expected. "I'm Marcus Donnelly. Welcome to Fort Brennan." "The pleasure is mine, Captain," Olivia replied, extending her gloved hand. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from years of military service, yet careful not to crush her fingers. "Please call me Marcus. We're to be married after all." His smile reached his eyes, and she felt some of her tension ease. "I hope the journey wasn't too arduous." "Long but educational," she said. Then immediately worried, she sounded frivolous. "I mean, I learned a great deal about the territory. From Herbert Finch, no doubt." Marcus glanced toward the traveling salesman, who was haggling with Jake over his luggage. "He means well, but he has a talent for dramatizing every prairie dog as a grizzly bear." Sarah Mitchell laughed. "That's putting it kindly. Last month he told the new recruits that Apaches could smell fear from 5 miles away and would track them by the scent of soap. The casual way they discussed such things both reassured and unsettled Olivia. These people lived with constant danger, yet maintained their humor and humanity. She wondered if she possessed such resilience. "Let me show you to the house," Marcus said. "I imagine you'd like to freshen up before dinner. Mrs. Mitchell has kindly agreed to prepare a meal for us." "Nothing fancy," Sarah added quickly. "Just good frontier cooking, though I did manage to trade some eggs for a bottle of wine from the Sutler's store. Seemed appropriate for the occasion." They walked through the fort's main compound, past the barracks where soldiers cleaned weapons and mended equipment. The rhythms of military life continued around them. Sentries changing guard, horses being groomed, reports being delivered to officers. It was organized chaos, everyone knowing their role and executing it without fuss. "The men respect you," Olivia observed, noticing how soldiers straightened when Marcus passed and touched their caps respectfully. "I've served with most of them for 3 years. We've been through some difficult times together." He paused, as if deciding how much to share. "Leadership out here isn't about rank, so much as proving you'll stand beside your men when trouble comes." They passed through a gate in the fort's inner wall, emerging into a small residential area where several houses sat among cottonwood trees near the river. The homes were modest but well-maintained, with small gardens and children's toys scattered. "In the yards, this is ours," Marcus said, stopping before an adobe house with blue-painted shutters and a covered porch. Wildflowers grew in boxes beneath the windows, and a vegetable garden occupied the side yard. The house was larger than she'd expected, with 2 main rooms, plus a small kitchen lean-to. The front room served as both parlor and dining area, furnished, with handmade chairs and a table that Marcus had obviously crafted himself. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with shelves holding books and a few decorative items. "I tried to make it comfortable," he said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "The bedroom is through there, and there's a small room I use as an office. I can move my things if you'd prefer it as a sewing room or—" "It's wonderful," Olivia interrupted, meaning it. The house felt like a home, not just a shelter. Someone had cared enough to add touches of beauty, the painted shutters, the flower boxes, the carefully arranged furniture. "Did you make all this yourself?" "Most of it. Gives a man something to do during the long winter evenings." He moved to the kitchen area, where a pump brought water directly into the house. "The well's only 20 feet deep here by the river, and there's a root cellar out back for storing food." Olivia explored the bedroom, finding a sturdy bed with a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, and a washstand with a mirror. Everything was clean and well organized, though distinctly masculine. She realized she'd need to add feminine touches to make the space truly theirs. "I can sleep in the office until—" Marcus began from the doorway, then stopped, color rising in his cheeks. The awkwardness of their situation suddenly hit her. They were strangers about to become husband and wife, sharing a home and presumably a bed, without the usual courtship period to develop intimacy gradually. The practical arrangements of frontier marriage were proving more complex than she'd anticipated. "We'll work things out as we go," she said gently. "There's no need to rush anything." Relief flickered across his features. "Thank you, I was hoping you'd feel that way. I know this is all rather unconventional." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus opened it to find a young soldier with corporal's stripes, sweating despite the cooling evening air. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but Colonel Hayes wants to see you right away. That patrol came back with more news." Marcus's expression immediately grew serious. "What kind of news, Corporal Williams?" "Apache war party, sir. Bigger than we thought. Lieutenant Crawford estimates maybe 40 warriors moving this direction. They hit the Morrison Ranch yesterday evening." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. The Morrison Ranch, Jake had mentioned it during their journey, describing it as only a day's ride from the fort. "Survivors?" Marcus asked tersely. "The family got away, sir. Made it to their neighbors, then sent word here. but the house and barn are gone, stock scattered or stolen. Marcus was already reaching for his gun belt, hanging on a peg near the door. "Tell the colonel I'll be right there, and have Williams ready my horse." "Yes, sir." The corporal hurried away. Marcus turned to Olivia, his face apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't how you imagined your first evening, but go," she said firmly. "This is your duty. I understand." He paused in buckling his gun belt, studying her face. "You're sure?" "I didn't come here expecting a parlor existence, Marcus. Do what you need to do." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps or approval. He stepped closer and briefly touched her hand. "Sarah will look after you, and don't worry about the Apache. The fort's never been successfully attacked, and we have good warning systems in place." After he left, Olivia sat in one of the handmade chairs, trying to process everything that had happened. In the space of an hour, she'd met her future husband, seen her new home, and learned that a war party was moving toward the fort. The frontier certainly didn't allow for gradual adjustments. Sarah appeared at the door with a covered pot and a concerned expression. "Heard about the troubles?" she said, letting herself in without ceremony. "Figured you might need some company and a hot meal." "Is this normal?" Olivia asked as Sarah busied herself in the kitchen area. "Apache raids, I mean. More common lately. Something stirred them up this summer. Could be pressure from other tribes, could be the new territorial governor's policies, could be they're just tired of losing their hunting grounds to settlers." Sarah ladled stew into bowls. "Point is, the army knows how to handle it, Marcus especially. He was a scout before his injury, spent years learning Apache tactics and territory." A scout? Olivia hadn't known this detail from his letters. "One of the best. Could track a grasshopper across solid rock," the men used to say. That's how he lost his leg, actually, volunteering for a dangerous reconnaissance mission during the war. Saved a lot of lives with the intelligence he gathered, but took a Confederate bullet for his trouble. The stew was delicious, thick with vegetables and tender meat. As they ate, Sarah shared stories about life at the fort, the harsh winters when supply wagons couldn't get through, the summer storms that could flood the river in minutes, the constant challenge of maintaining civilization in an untamed land. "Don't let me frighten you," Sarah said, noticing Olivia's expression. "There are good times too. We have dances when visiting dignitaries come through. The children put on plays for holidays. Last Christmas, the men organized a horse race with prizes for the winners. And there's real friendship here, people who will risk their lives for each other without hesitation." As evening fell, they could hear increased activity around the fort. Horses being saddled, men receiving orders, equipment being checked and prepared. Whatever was happening with the Apache threat, the army was taking it seriously. "Will they go after the war party?" Olivia asked. "Probably send out patrols to track their movements. The key is preventing them from hitting any more ranches or settlements. Sometimes the mere presence of cavalry is enough to make them move on to easier targets." Around 10 o'clock, Marcus returned, looking tired but not overly concerned. He accepted a bowl of stew gratefully and gave them a brief report. "The Apache are moving north, probably heading back to their strongholds in the mountains. We're sending out 3 patrols tomorrow to make sure they keep moving and don't circle back. Should be resolved within a few days. Will you be leading?" "One of the patrols?" Olivia asked. Marcus hesitated. "I was, but Colonel Hayes suggested I might want to postpone my scouting duties for a few days. Something about having more pressing personal obligations." He smiled wryly. "Apparently word of our engagement has reached the command staff." After Sarah left, Olivia and Marcus found themselves alone in their new home, suddenly aware of the intimate implications of their arrangement. They made awkward small talk while tidying up from dinner, both carefully avoiding the obvious question of sleeping arrangements. "I've been thinking," Marcus said finally. "Perhaps we should have a proper courtship period, even if we're already engaged. Give us time to get to know each other before—" He gestured vaguely toward the bedroom. "I think that's wise," Olivia agreed, relieved. "Though I suppose we should marry soon for propriety's sake. People will talk if I'm living here, unmarried. The chaplain could perform the ceremony whenever you're ready. We could have the marriage, but still take time for the other aspects of marriage." It was a practical solution that took some pressure off both of them. They were strangers, after all, despite months of correspondence. Physical intimacy should develop naturally from emotional connection, not from legal obligation. "There's something else we should discuss," Marcus said, settling into his chair with obvious relief. The day had been long for his injured leg. "The dangers here are real, Olivia. I won't lie to you about that. But I want you to know that protecting you is my first priority, always, before my duty to the army, before anything else." "That's not right," she replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Your duty to the army protects everyone here, including me. I won't be the reason you compromise that duty." He studied her carefully. "You understand what you're saying? That there might be times when I have to leave you, potentially in danger. To serve the greater good, I understand, and I accept it." She met his gaze steadily. "I didn't come here expecting to be sheltered from the realities of frontier life. I came here to be your partner, not your burden." Something profound passed between them in that moment. Not romantic love, not yet, but a recognition of compatible values and mutual respect. It was perhaps a better foundation for marriage than passion alone. "In that case," Marcus said, "I think we're going to do very well together, Olivia Whitmore." Outside, the night sounds of the desert began. Coyotes, calling across the valley, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves in the evening breeze. Inside their small house, two strangers began the delicate process of becoming partners in the demanding dance of frontier survival. The next morning brought Olivia's first taste of frontier routine. She woke before dawn to the sound of reveille echoing across the fort, followed by the organized chaos of soldiers beginning their daily duties. Marcus was already up, quietly preparing coffee in the kitchen so as not to disturb her. "Good morning," he said when she emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed despite the early hour. "I hope the bugle didn't wake you too harshly. I've always been an early riser." She smoothed her skirts, suddenly conscious of appearing proper despite their informal living arrangement. "What time do the patrols leave?" "Within the hour." "Coffee?" He poured her a cup from the pot on the wood stove, the aroma rich and welcome in the cool morning air. Through the window she could see soldiers leading horses from the stables, checking equipment and forming into groups. The efficiency was impressive. No wasted motion or unnecessary conversation, just men who knew their jobs and executed them with quiet competence. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. The thought of spending her second day in Arizona territory alone among strangers felt daunting. "Should be back by evening day after tomorrow at the latest. We're just going to track the war party's movements and make sure they've moved on." He hesitated, then added, "Sarah has offered to show you around the fort today, help you get oriented." "That's kind of her." Olivia sipped her coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Marcus, I want you to know, I don't expect you to change your duties because of me. I knew what I was accepting when I came here." He set down his cup and looked at her directly. "Even so, leaving you alone so soon after your arrival feels wrong. If circumstances were different, but they're not different. This is reality." She managed a smile. "Besides, I need to learn about my new home sometime. Better to start now than later." A knock interrupted them. Corporal Williams stood at the door, holding Marcus's rifle and a canvas bag of supplies. "Ready when you are, Captain. Lieutenant Barnes is asking about departure time." Marcus stood, testing. his weight on his injured leg, as he always did first thing in the morning. The limp was more pronounced when he was tired or the weather was changing, Olivia had noticed. "Tell Barnes 5 minutes." He turned to Olivia. "There's food in the pantry, and Sarah said she'd bring you some eggs from her chickens. The pump works well, but don't drink water that's been sitting. Always draw it fresh." He was fussing, she realized, nervous about leaving her. It was oddly touching from a man who'd led cavalry charges and tracked Apache war parties. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Go do what you need to do." Marcus picked up his hat and gun belt, then paused. "Olivia, if something happens, if there's any trouble at all, go to the colonel's house immediately. It's the large building with the flag. Paul, his wife Ellen knows you're here. What kind of trouble?" "Probably nothing. But the Apache are unpredictable, and sometimes they double back or split into smaller groups. Just be aware of your surroundings." After he left, Olivia stood in the doorway watching the patrol form up in the fort's main yard. Marcus sat his horse with easy grace despite his disability, transformed from the slightly awkward man in their parlor to a confident military leader. The other soldiers clearly respected his authority, listening intently as he gave final instructions. The patrol rode out, just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, dust rising behind them as they headed south toward the area where the Apache had been spotted. Olivia watched until they disappeared beyond a rise, then turned back to her empty house with a strange mixture of pride and loneliness. Sarah arrived within the hour, carrying a basket of eggs and wearing a practical calico. "Dress suitable for a day of activity. Ready for the grand tour?" she asked cheerfully. "Fair warning, Fort Brennan isn't much to look at, but what we lack in beauty we make up for in character." They began at the blacksmith shop, where a burly sergeant named Murphy was shoeing horses for the remaining garrison. The forge blazed, hot even in the cool morning air, and the ring of hammer on anvil provided a steady rhythm for their conversation. "Sergeant Murphy came here straight from County Cork," Sarah explained. "Best horseman in the territory, and he can repair anything made of metal. Last winter, he fixed the colonel's pocket watch with nothing but a magnifying glass and infinite patience." Murphy tipped his cap politely when introduced, his Irish accent thick as cream. "Welcome to our little piece of heaven, miss, though I hear you'll be Mrs. Donnelly soon enough." "Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. Captain Donnelly's a fine man," Murphy continued, never pausing in his work. "Lost his legs serving his country, but never lost his spirit. You've chosen well, if you don't mind me saying." They visited the general store next, where a thin man named Harrison sold everything from needles and thread to ammunition and tobacco. His wife ran a small restaurant in the back room, serving meals to soldiers and civilians who didn't have cooking facilities. "Business isn't exactly booming," Harrison admitted with a wry smile, "but it's steady. People need supplies, and we're the only game for 100 miles in any direction." The medical facility occupied a small building near the administration offices. Dr. Peterson, an elderly man with kind eyes and gentle hands, showed Olivia his limited but well-organized supplies. "I do what I can with what I have," he said. "Mostly gunshot wounds, broken bones, and the usual frontier ailments. The women help with childbirths. I have to admit they often know more about that than I do." "Are there many children here?" Olivia asked. 8 families with little ones. Good kids, too. They have to grow up fast out here, but they still find time to be children." He paused. "I hope you and Captain Donnelly will add to our numbers eventually. Children give a place hope for the future." The comment brought a flush to Olivia's cheeks, but she managed a polite response. The assumption that she and Marcus would have children seemed natural to everyone here, though they hadn't yet discussed the subject themselves. The school occupied one room of the chapel building, taught by a young woman named Miss Crawford, who'd come west from Ohio the previous year. "I have 12 students ranging from 6 to 15, she explained. showing Olivia the simple classroom with its wooden benches and slate boards. We cover basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. I try to include some practical skills. 2, surveying for the boys, household management for the girls. "Do you enjoy the work?" Olivia asked, impressed by the young teacher's obvious dedication. "Most days, it's challenging. Some of these children know more about surviving in hostile territory than I'll ever learn. But they're eager to learn about the wider world, and that makes it worthwhile." At the chapel, they met Chaplain Morrison, a middle-aged man with a gentle manner and thoughtful eyes. The building served multiple purposes: religious services, community meetings, school classes, and social gatherings. "I understand you and Captain Donnelly would like to marry soon," he said. "I'd be honored to perform the ceremony. Have you given thought to when you'd prefer it?" Olivia realized she hadn't discussed specific timing with Marcus. "Perhaps in a few days. I'd like to get settled first, and for him to return from this patrol." "Of course, no need to rush these things, though I understand the practical considerations of your living arrangements." His tone was non-judgmental, recognizing the realities of frontier life. "Would you like a simple ceremony or something more elaborate?" "Simple, I think. We're both practical people. I'll speak with Captain Donnelly when he returns. In the meantime, if you need anything, someone to talk to, spiritual guidance, or just a friendly ear, please don't hesitate to come by." The afternoon brought a visit to the Colonel's house, where Ellen Hayes welcomed Olivia with warm hospitality. The Colonel's wife was a sophisticated woman who'd somehow maintained an air of Eastern refinement despite years on the frontier. "The secret," she confided over tea and cake, "is to hold on to the civilized customs that matter while adapting to necessary changes. I still dress for dinner and maintain proper calling hours, but I've also learned to shoot a rifle and preserve meat for winter." Her parlor displayed an eclectic mix of fine Eastern furniture and practical frontier items, a grand piano-sharing space with hunting rifles, delicate china displayed alongside sturdy earthenware. "How do you manage it?" Olivia asked. "Maintaining yourself, I suppose, in such a challenging environment." "By remembering that civilization isn't about convenience, it's about values, treating people with respect, maintaining standards of behavior, creating beauty where you can. The external trappings matter less than the internal commitment to being the person you want to be." It was advice Olivia found both inspiring and practical. She'd worried about losing her identity in the harsh realities of frontier life, but Ellen Hayes proved it was possible to adapt without surrendering your essential self. The day's final stop was the fort's small cemetery, where weathered wooden crosses marked the graves of soldiers and civilians who died far from home. Sarah showed her the section where military families were buried, speaking softly about the people whose lives had ended in this remote place. "It's not morbid," Sarah said, noticing Olivia's expression. "It's important to remember that this land has been bought with blood and sacrifice. Every family here has lost someone, if not to violence, then to disease or accident. But we stay because we believe in what we're building." As evening approached, they returned to Olivia's house, where she prepared a simple dinner and waited for word from the patrol. The fort settled into its nighttime routine, guards taking their posts, families gathering for meals, the gradual quieting of daily activity. Around sunset, a messenger arrived with news that the patrol had made contact with the Apache Trail, but wouldn't return until the following day. The war party was moving north as expected, but Marcus wanted to be certain they'd crossed into the mountains before declaring the threat past. "No news is good news in this case," Sarah assured her. "If there'd been trouble, we'd have heard by now." That night, alone in the house she now shared with a man she barely knew, Olivia reflected on her first full day as a frontier woman. The physical challenges were real: the heat, the dust, the constant awareness of danger. But the people she'd met were remarkable in their resilience and community spirit. She'd expected to feel overwhelmed or frightened, but instead found herself oddly energized. There was something liberating about a place where people were judged by their actions rather than their pedigree, where everyone contributed to the common good regardless of their background. Writing in her journal by lamplight, she tried to capture her impressions. The frontier strips away pretense and reveals character. I'm beginning to understand why Marcus chose to stay here after his injury rather than return east. There's a clarity of purpose here, a directness of living that feels honest after the complicated social maneuvering of Philadelphia. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and experiences. The patrol would return, she and Marcus would continue learning about each other, and she would take another step toward becoming the frontier woman she was beginning to believe she could be. Outside, her window, coyotes called across the desert darkness, their voices wild and haunting. Instead of frightening her, the sound seemed to promise adventure and possibilities she'd never imagined in her previous life. She was no longer Olivia Whitmore, of Philadelphia, refined lady of reduced circumstances. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone ready for whatever the territory might demand of her. The second day of Marcus's absence dawned with an unusual stillness that made veteran soldiers uneasy. Olivia noticed it at breakfast, when she joined Sarah Mitchell and several other wives at the communal dining area behind Harrison's store. The women's conversation was subdued, punctuated by glances toward the southern horizon, where dust devils danced in the growing heat. "Something feels different today," murmured Mrs. Patterson, the sutler's wife. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who'd lived on the frontier for 15 years. "Can't put my finger on it, but the air feels charged." Ellen Hayes, who joined them despite her usual preference for taking meals at home, nodded thoughtfully. "The animals are restless too. Our horses were stamping and nickering all night, and this morning the chickens won't come out of their coop." Olivia had noticed similar behavior from the fort's livestock, but attributed it to her own nervousness affecting her perceptions. Now she wondered if the animals sensed something beyond human awareness. "Could be weather coming," suggested Mary Crawford, the young schoolteacher. "Sometimes the pressure drops before a big storm, making everything edgy." But the sky remained cloudless, a brilliant blue dome that promised another scorching day. If the weather was approaching, it wasn't from any visible source. Dr. Peterson appeared at their table, his usually calm demeanor showing traces of concern. "Ladies, I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to let you know, we've had word from the Morrison family. They made it safely to Hendrick's place, but old Tom Morrison took an arrow in the shoulder during their escape. He's stable, but the wound is infected." "Will you go to him?" Ellen asked. "I should, but Colonel Hayes is reluctant to send anyone beyond the fort's immediate vicinity until Captain Donnelly's patrol returns. We don't know exactly where those Apache are, or if they've split into smaller groups." The reminder of the ongoing threat cast a shadow over their breakfast. These women had learned to live with constant danger, but that didn't make it easier when that danger felt particularly close. After the meal, Olivia joined Sarah for her daily rounds, visiting the sick, helping with laundry, teaching reading to some of the younger children whose parents were too busy for formal education. The routine work helped distract from worries about Marcus and the patrol, but couldn't entirely dispel the sense of unease that seemed to hang over the fort. Around midday, while they were mending torn clothing in Sarah's kitchen, a commotion arose from the main gate. Voices called out in Spanish, and they could hear horses approaching at speed. "That'll be the Valdez family," Sarah said, recognizing the voices. "They have a small ranch about 10 miles east. Wonder what brings them here in such a hurry." stepped outside to see a Mexican family, a man, woman, and 3 children riding into the fort on lathered horses. The man was shouting in rapid Spanish to anyone who would listen, gesturing frantically toward the east. Sergeant Murphy emerged from the blacksmith shop, his Spanish rusty but functional. After a brief conversation, his face went pale. He immediately headed toward the administrative building at a run. "What is it?" Sarah called after him. "Apache!" he shouted back. "Big war party, maybe 60 warriors, heading this way fast." The news hit the fort like a physical blow. 60 warriors was far more than the patrol had reported. Either they'd miscounted badly, or this was an entirely different group. And if they were heading toward Fort Brennan, the patrol might be riding directly into their path. Colonel Hayes emerged from his office, already buckling on his gun belt. The calm efficiency that characterized military life accelerated into controlled urgency as orders were given and received. "All civilians to the central compound," Hayes commanded. "Sergeant Davis, get the outer gate secured and post extra sentries. Corporal Williams, send a rider to try and intercept Captain Donnelly's patrol. They need to know what they're riding into." The fort transformed within minutes. Children were gathered from their play and herded toward the safest buildings. Women packed emergency supplies, food, water, medical equipment, ammunition. Men checked weapons and took positions along the defensive walls. Olivia found herself swept along with the organized chaos, her Eastern upbringing providing no framework for this situation. Sarah grabbed her arm and guided her toward the colonel's house, which served as the primary civilian shelter during attacks. "Stay calm and do exactly what you're told," Sarah advised tersely. "These people know what they're doing. We've been through this before." The colonel's house quickly filled with women, children, and elderly men unable to serve in the fort's defense. Ellen Hayes took charge with quiet authority, organizing the space efficiently and keeping everyone focused on practical tasks rather than fear. "Mrs. Patterson, please inventory our food supplies. Mary, keep the children occupied with quiet games. Dr. Peterson, set up your medical kit in the back room in case we need it." Olivia was assigned to help prepare bandages and organize medical supplies, grim work that brought home the reality of what they might be facing. As she tore clean cloth into strips, she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus and his patrol. Were they safe? Had they encountered the Apache? Were they fighting for their lives while she sat in relative safety? Through the windows, they could see soldiers taking positions along the fort's walls. The defensive preparations were thorough and professional, but 60 Apache warriors was a formidable force for a garrison already reduced by the patrol's absence. "How often does this happen?" Olivia asked Ellen quietly, not wanting to alarm the children. "Full-scale attacks? Maybe twice a year. Usually they probe our defenses, steal some livestock, and move on. But this sounds different, more organized, more determined." Around 2 o'clock, the lookout in the bell tower began ringing the alarm. Through the fort's southern gate, they could see dust clouds approaching, not the scattered puffs of individual riders, but the solid wall that came from a large group moving fast. "Here they come," someone whispered, and the house fell silent except for the sound of children whimpering despite their mother's efforts to comfort them. Olivia moved to a window that faced south, pressing her face against the glass to see what was approaching. At first, she could make out only dust and movement. Then individual figures began to emerge from the haze. Apache warriors on horseback, painted for war, weapons glinting in the afternoon sun. They rode with deadly purpose, spreading out as they approached the fort to attack from multiple directions. Simultaneously, even from a distance, their skill and coordination were evident. These weren't desperate raiders. They were experienced fighters executing a carefully planned assault. The first shots rang out as the Apache came within rifle range. Soldiers along the fort's walls opened fire with disciplined volleys, trying to break up the attack before it could gain momentum. But the Apache were too skilled to be easily deterred. They wheeled and circled, using their superior horsemanship to present difficult targets, while returning fire with rifles and arrows. "Get away from the windows!" Dr. Peterson commanded sharply. "Stray bullets can penetrate glass." They huddled in the center of the room, listening to the battle raging outside. The sound was terrifying. Gunshots, war cries, shouted orders, the thunder of hoofbeats on hard ground. Occasionally, a bullet would strike the house's thick walls with a sharp crack, making everyone flinch. The children were crying now, despite their mother's efforts. The women tried to maintain calm facades, but Olivia could see fear in every face. These people had lived with danger for years, but that didn't make them immune to terror when it came calling. Ellen Hayes began leading them in singing hymns, not from religious fervor, but to give them something to focus on besides the violence. Outside, the familiar melodies provided a fragile anchor of normalcy in the chaos. "How long do these attacks usually last?" Olivia asked Sarah during a brief lull in the fighting. "Depends on how determined they are. Sometimes they give up after an hour if they can't break through quickly. Other times..." She didn't finish the sentence, but her expression made the implications clear. A tremendous crash from somewhere nearby made them all jump. Through the walls, they could hear splintering wood and shouted orders. Something had been damaged or destroyed, though they couldn't tell what. Dr. Peterson moved to his medical supplies, checking everything one more time. "If anyone's wounded, they'll bring them here," he explained grimly. "I want to be ready." As if summoned by his words, the door burst open. 2 soldiers carried in a third man, blood streaming from a shoulder wound. Dr. Peterson immediately took charge, clearing space on the dining table to examine the injury. "Arrow went clean through," he announced after a quick examination. "Missed the bone, but there's significant bleeding. I need hot water and clean cloth." Olivia found herself assisting without conscious decision, holding bandages and following the doctor's curt instructions. The wounded soldier was young, probably no more than 20, his face pale with shock and pain. "Easy, son," Dr. Peterson murmured as he worked. "You're going to be fine. Just stay still while I get this bleeding stopped." The sight of blood and the soldier's obvious pain made Olivia's stomach churn, but she forced herself to remain steady. This was her life now. There was no room for squeamishness or weakness. Outside, the battle continued with undiminished intensity. The Apache had clearly committed to a serious assault, not the hit-and-run raid the fort usually faced. The sound of gunfire was constant now, punctuated by war cries and the crash of impacts against the fort's defenses. "They're trying to fire the buildings," Ellen observed grimly, sniffing smoke in the air. "That's always their goal. Create chaos and force us into the open where they can pick us off." Smoke was indeed beginning to seep under the doors and through the windows. Somewhere in the fort, something was burning. The acrid smell made everyone cough and added another layer of urgency to their situation. "We might have to move, Doctor," Peterson said quietly to Ellen. "If the fire spreads to this building." "Where would we go?" she replied. "Every building in the fort is a target." It was a sobering reminder of their vulnerability. The fort's defensive walls provided some protection, but if the Apache succeeded in creating enough chaos, those walls could become a trap rather than a sanctuary. A new sound joined the cacophony outside, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats from the north. For a moment, everyone froze, wondering if the Apache had somehow circled around to attack from a new direction. Then someone shouted from the walls, "It's Captain Donnelly! The patrol's coming back!" The relief in the room was palpable. Marcus and his men had returned, adding their strength to the fort's defense just when it was needed most. Through the gunfire and chaos, they could hear new orders being shouted, the sound of reinforcements taking positions along the walls. But even with the patrol's return, the battle was far from over. 60 Apache warriors didn't give up easily, and they still held the initiative in the attack. The real test was just beginning, and Olivia could only pray that Marcus had made it back alive and unharmed. The sound of his voice carrying orders across the compound was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Marcus's return brought immediate tactical changes to the fort's defense. Through the windows, those inside could hear his voice cutting through the chaos, issuing rapid orders that repositioned men and concentrated firepower where it was most needed. The random sounds of desperate fighting began organizing into coordinated defensive patterns. "He's putting sharpshooters on the northeast tower," Ellen observed, listening carefully to the commands. "That's where the Apache are pressing hardest." "Smart. The angle will let them cover the main gate approaches." Dr. Peterson finished bandaging the wounded soldier and moved him to a more comfortable position against the wall. "How bad is it out there, son?" he asked quietly. "Bad enough, Doc. They came at us like devils, more than we've ever seen at once. Captain Donnelly saved our necks, though, spotted their dust from 5 miles out and got us back here just in time." The young man winced as he shifted position. "Don't know what we'd have done if we'd ridden straight into that war party unprepared." The thought of Marcus and his men being overwhelmed in the open desert made Olivia's blood run cold. If they'd been caught away from the fort's protection, none of them would have survived to reinforce the defense. A tremendous crash shook the building, followed by shouting and the sound of running feet. Something heavy had struck the fort's outer wall, probably a burning arrow or thrown torch designed to spread the fire that was already creating smoke throughout the compound. "They're trying to burn us out," Sarah said grimly. "Force us to abandon the defensive positions." Through the smoke-hazed air, they could see soldiers moving with buckets, fighting the flames while maintaining their positions against the attacking warriors. It was a delicate balance. Too much attention to the fires would leave gaps in the defense, but unchecked flames could destroy the fort from within. Ellen Hayes took charge of organizing the civilians for possible evacuation. "If the fires spread to this building, we'll need to move quickly and in order. Mrs. Patterson, you'll lead the children to the root cellar behind the blacksmith shop. Mary, help Dr. Peterson move his supplies and the wounded man." "What about the other buildings?" Olivia asked. "The magazine is the most important. If fire reaches the ammunition stores, it'll kill everyone in the fort. The soldiers know that. They'll protect it above everything else." The battle outside intensified as the Apache pressed their advantage. War cries echoed off the fort's walls, mixing with the crack of rifles and the whistle of arrows. Occasionally, they could hear individual voices. Soldiers calling for ammunition, officers shouting tactical adjustments, the groans of wounded men. Dr. Peterson was preparing to venture outside to treat more casualties when the door burst open again. This time it was Corporal Williams, his uniform torn and blackened with smoke. "Doc, we need you at the north wall. 3 men down, 2 serious." He noticed the civilians huddled in the room and addressed Ellen directly. "Ma'am, Captain Donnelly says to keep everyone here for now. We're holding them, but it's touch and go." "How's the captain?" Olivia asked before she could stop herself. Williams looked surprised to see her. "He's fine, miss. Right in the thick of it, directing the defense. Took an arrow graze on his arm, but it didn't slow him down any." The news that Marcus was wounded, even slightly, made Olivia's heart race with fear and anger. These Apache had no right to attack innocent people trying to build lives in this harsh land. The fury surprised her with its intensity. When had she started thinking of the fort as home and its people as family worth defending? Dr. Peterson gathered his medical supplies and followed Williams toward the door. "Keep everyone calm," he told Ellen. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Left without their medical anchor, the civilians faced their fears with nothing but mutual support. The children had quieted, exhausted by prolonged terror. Their mothers held them close, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow against the ongoing violence outside. Ellen moved among the group, checking on everyone and maintaining the illusion of calm control, but Olivia could see the strain in her face. The colonel's wife had experience with frontier dangers, but this attack was larger and more sustained than anything they'd faced before. "Tell us about Philadelphia," Ellen said suddenly, settling beside Olivia. "Help us think about something besides this." It was clearly a deliberate distraction, but Olivia embraced it gratefully. She began describing her former life, the tree-lined streets, the busy markets, the social gatherings that had once seemed so important. As she talked, she realized how distant that world felt now. Had it really been only days since she'd stepped off the stagecoach? "Do you miss it?" Mary Crawford asked. Olivia considered the question seriously. "I miss the safety and predictability, but I don't miss the emptiness. Back there, I was just marking time, waiting for life to happen to me. Here, I'm actually living." "Even with Apache trying to kill us?" Sarah asked with dark humor. "Especially then. At least here the dangers are honest and direct. In Philadelphia, the threats were hidden: poverty, social ruin, loneliness. Here, you know where you stand." The conversation was interrupted by a new sound, the splintering of wood from somewhere nearby. Through the smoke-hazed windows, they could see Apache warriors who had somehow gotten over the outer wall, fighting hand-to-hand with soldiers in the compound itself. "They've breached the perimeter," Ellen said quietly. "Everyone stay low and quiet." The reality of their situation became starkly clear. The fort's outer defenses had been penetrated. Warriors were now inside the compound, fighting among the buildings where the civilians sheltered. Their safe haven had become a battlefield. They could hear individual fights now, the clash of weapons, grunts of effort, cries of pain. Somewhere close by, men were fighting and dying while they huddled helplessly behind walls that seemed increasingly inadequate protection. A shadow passed by one of the windows, too quick to identify, but moving with the fluid grace that marked Apache warriors. Olivia felt her mouth go dry with terror. If one of them tried to enter this building. Ellen Hayes had moved to a cabinet and withdrawn a rifle, checking its loading with practiced efficiency. Several other women produced weapons as well: revolvers, another rifle, even a shotgun. These frontier wives had learned that survival sometimes required more than prayers and hiding. "Can you shoot?" Ellen asked Olivia quietly. I've never tried." "Here." Sarah handed her a small revolver. "Point it toward any man who comes through that door who isn't wearing a uniform. Pull the trigger. Don't think about it, just do it." The weight of the weapon felt alien in Olivia's hands. She'd been raised to believe that violence was always wrong, that ladies never engaged in such behavior. But those beliefs seemed naive now, faced with the reality of people trying to kill her and everyone she was beginning to care about. Through the walls, they could hear Marcus's voice again, closer now, shouting orders as he directed the close-quarters fighting. He was moving through the compound, leading from the front despite his disability and wound. The thought of him exposed to such danger while she cowered in relative safety made her feel simultaneously proud and terrified. The door rattled as someone tried the handle from outside. Everyone in the room froze, weapons raised, hearts hammering. The handle turned slowly, and the door began to open. Ellen Hayes raised her rifle, finger on the trigger, ready to defend everyone in the room. The door swung wider, revealing a figure silhouetted against the smoke-filled daylight outside. "Don't shoot! It's Patterson!" The sutler stumbled into the room, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, his clothes torn and singed. His wife immediately rushed to help him, but he waved her away urgently. "They're in the compound," he gasped. "Scattered fighting everywhere. Some of the buildings are burning bad. We might have to evacuate soon." "What about the main defense?" Ellen asked, holding but barely. "Captain Donnelly's got men positioned at key points, But there's too much ground to cover with the forces we have. If more Apache get over the walls..." He didn't need to finish. Everyone understood the mathematics of their situation. The fort's garrison, even reinforced by the returning patrol, wasn't large enough to defend every building against a determined assault by 60 warriors. Outside, the fighting seemed to be moving closer. They could hear individual voices now, soldiers calling to each other as they moved between positions. The battle was no longer at the fort's perimeter. It was everywhere, a chaotic melee with no clear front lines. Dr. Peterson returned, his medical bag bloodied and his face grim. "I need to set up a field hospital," he announced. "Too many wounded to treat individually. Mrs. Hayes, can we use the back room?" "Of course. What do you need? Clean water, all the cloth we can find, and steady hands. This is going to get worse before it gets better." As they organized the makeshift medical station, the sound of fighting grew more intense. Individual gunshots had given way to sustained volleys, suggesting that the Apache had concentrated their forces for a major push against the fort's remaining defenses. Through the chaos, Marcus's voice could still be heard, coordinating the resistance with calm authority despite the desperate circumstances. He was everywhere at once, directing fire, moving wounded men to safety, plugging gaps in the defensive line. His leadership was holding the fort together through sheer force of will and tactical skill, but even the best leadership had limits when facing overwhelming odds. The Apache were winning through simple mathematics. They had more men, and they were fighting on ground of their choosing. Unless something changed dramatically, Fort Brennan would fall within hours. That realization settled over the room like a physical weight. These people had built lives in this harsh place, carving civilization from wilderness through courage and determination. Now it might all be destroyed in a single afternoon by warriors who wanted nothing more than to drive them from Apache land. Olivia looked around at the faces surrounding her, Sarah's practical determination, Ellen's quiet strength, Mary's youthful resilience, Dr. Peterson's selfless dedication to healing. These weren't the soft, sheltered people she'd known in Philadelphia. They were frontiers people, tested by hardship and refined by challenge. If this was to be her end, she realized, at least she would die among people worth dying with. That thought brought unexpected peace, even as the sounds of approaching violence grew louder outside their increasingly fragile sanctuary. The sound that changed everything was silence. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the gunfire stopped. The war cries faded. Even the crackling of flames seemed muted. In that eerie quiet, everyone in the colonel's house held their breath, straining to understand what the sudden stillness meant. Then Marcus's voice cut through the air, strong and clear. "Ceasefire! Hold your positions." Ellen Hayes moved cautiously to a window, peering through the smoke-hazed glass. "They're pulling back," she said, disbelief coloring her voice. "The Apache are withdrawing to the outer perimeter." But instead of relief, her tone carried a note of deeper concern. Experienced frontier fighters knew that Apache warriors didn't retreat without reason. They were regrouping for something else, something worse. Dr. Peterson looked up from the wounded man he was treating. "Could be they're running low on ammunition, or maybe they've taken too many casualties to continue the assault." "No," Ellen said grimly, still watching through the window. "They're forming up in a line across the southern approach. This isn't a withdrawal, it's preparation for a final charge." The realization hit everyone simultaneously. The Apache had tested the fort's defenses, identified the weak points, and absorbed the tactical lessons of the first assault. Now they were preparing to concentrate their entire force against the most vulnerable section of the perimeter, betting everything on one overwhelming attack. Patterson, still bleeding from his head wound, struggled to his feet. "I need to get back out there. Every rifle counts now." "You're in no condition to fight," Dr. Peterson protested. "Doc, with respect, none of us are in condition for what's coming, but we're going to do it anyway because the alternative is dying. Like sheep in a pen." His words crystallized the stark reality of their situation. This wasn't just another frontier skirmish that would end with negotiation or Apache boredom. This was a fight to the death, winner take all. Ellen began checking her rifle again, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. "If they break through, we'll make our stand here. The children and wounded stay in the back room. Everyone else takes a position at the windows." Olivia felt the revolver's weight in her palm, heavier now that she understood she might actually have to use it. The philosophical questions that had once seemed so important, whether violence was ever justified, whether civilization could survive such brutality, had been swept away by the immediate need to protect innocent lives. Through the walls, they could hear Marcus moving among his men, checking positions and ammunition supplies. His voice carried calm authority, but Olivia had learned to read the subtle signs of stress in his tone. He knew how desperate their situation had become. "Captain's repositioning everyone for the final stand," Patterson reported, having listened at the door. "Concentrating our best shooters where they'll do the most good. But we're down to maybe 30 effective fighters against 50 Apache who know they can't afford to fail." The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even with perfect shooting and ideal positioning, the odds were heavily against the fort's defenders. Apache warriors were among the finest fighters in the world, and they had the initiative, numbers, and desperation that came from fighting for their homeland. Sarah moved to Olivia's side, her face showing the strain of prolonged terror mixed with grim determination. "Whatever happens, we don't let them take us alive. You understand that, don't you?" Olivia understood. She'd heard the stories, knew what happened to women and children captured in Apache raids. Death in battle was preferable to the alternatives, though the thought of dying in this remote place, so far from everything she'd once known, filled her with profound sadness. But that sadness was overwhelmed by a fiercer emotion, anger that these people who'd welcomed her, who'd tried to build something good in this harsh land, might be destroyed by violence they'd never sought. The Apache had legitimate grievances about their stolen homeland, but the soldiers and civilians at Fort Brennan weren't the architects of that injustice. They were just people trying to survive and build families in the only way they knew how. The silence outside stretched longer, building tension like a drawn bowstring. Then, cutting through the stillness, came the sound they'd all been dreading, a sustained war cry from dozens of throats, growing louder as the Apache charged. "Here they come," Ellen said quietly. The final assault began with overwhelming force and precision. 60 Apache warriors struck the fort's southern wall simultaneously, using grappling ropes, ladders, and sheer athletic skill to scale the defenses. The concentrated attack overwhelmed the thinly stretched defenders at multiple points. Gunfire erupted with desperate intensity as the soldiers tried to repel the assault. But there were too many attackers and too few defenders. Within minutes, Apache warriors were pouring over the walls and into the compound, transforming the organized defense into chaotic individual battles. Through the windows, those trapped in the colonel's house could see the fort's final moments as an organized military position. Buildings burned unchecked now, as soldiers abandoned firefighting to concentrate on direct combat. Smoke filled the compound, creating a hellish landscape where figures appeared and disappeared like demons in the haze. Marcus's voice could still be heard, somehow maintaining tactical coordination even as his defensive line collapsed. He was calling for fighting withdrawals to secondary positions, trying to buy time and preserve lives, even as the overall situation became hopeless. "They're falling back to the inner compound," Ellen observed, watching the tactical situation develop. Marcus is trying to consolidate the survivors for a final stand, but the Apache weren't allowing any organized withdrawal. They pressed their advantage ruthlessly, pursuing individual soldiers and preventing the formation of any coherent defensive line. The battle had devolved into a dozen separate fights scattered throughout the burning fort. Dr. Peterson abandoned his medical supplies and picked up a rifle. They'll be here soon. Everyone needs to be ready. As if summoned by his words, shadows appeared at the windows, Apache warriors checking each building for remaining defenders or valuable captives. The colonel's house, being the largest and most prominent civilian structure, would certainly be searched. Ellen positioned herself at the front window, rifle aimed at the door. Sarah took the opposite window with her revolver. Mary Crawford, pale but determined, crouched behind an overturned table with the shotgun. Even Mrs. Patterson, despite her husband's injuries, held a small pistol with steady hands. Olivia found herself at the rear window, watching the approach from the direction of the burning barracks. The revolver felt like it weighed 10 pounds, and she wondered if she would actually be able to pull the trigger when the moment came. The first Apache warrior appeared at the front door, testing the handle cautiously. He was young, maybe 25, with traditional war paint and modern weapons, a mixing of old and new that characterized this conflict between cultures. He moved with fluid grace, every motion economical and purposeful. Ellen Hayes tracked him with her rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. But before she could fire, the warrior melted back into the smoke, apparently deciding to check other approaches first. Smart, Ellen muttered. He knows we're armed and ready. He'll try to find a better angle. They waited in tense silence, weapons trained on every possible entrance. The children huddled in the back room with the wounded soldier, their mothers whispered reassurances, doing little to mask the terror in young voices. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Warriors burst through the front door, both side windows moving with coordinated precision that spoke of careful planning. Ellen's rifle boomed, dropping the first man through the door, but 2 more immediately took his place. Sarah's revolver cracked repeatedly at the left window. Mary's shotgun roared from behind her barricade. The small room filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of burned powder, making it almost impossible to see or breathe. Olivia found herself face to face with a warrior who'd come through the rear window, a man about her own age with intelligent eyes and a face marked by old scars. For a frozen moment they stared at each other, predator and prey suspended in time. Then training overcame thought. She pulled the trigger. The revolver bucked in her hands, the sound deafening in the confined space. The warrior spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Not dead, but wounded badly enough to remove him from the fight. The sight of what she'd done hit Olivia like a physical blow. She'd shot a human being, actually pointed a weapon at another person and pulled the trigger. The philosophical implications that might have paralyzed her in peaceful times were swept away by immediate necessity as another warrior appeared at the same window. This time, she didn't hesitate. The second shot took the man center mass, dropping him instantly. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a civilized Philadelphia lady was screaming in horror at what she'd become. But that person seemed like a stranger now, irrelevant to the desperate fight for survival. Around her, the other women were fighting with equal determination. Ellen worked her rifle with practiced efficiency, each shot carefully aimed despite the chaos. Sarah had switched to a second revolver after emptying the first. Mary reloaded her shotgun with movements made clumsy by fear, but still effective. But they were being overwhelmed by numbers. More warriors appeared at every entrance faster than they could be repelled. The room filled with struggling figures as the battle became hand-to-hand. Dr. Peterson grappled with a warrior near the medical supplies, both men fighting desperately with knives and improvised weapons. Mrs. Patterson screamed as another warrior reached for one of the children, then went silent as Sarah's bullet found its mark. Through the chaos, Olivia heard a sound that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Marcus's voice, much closer than before, shouting orders to men who were fighting their way toward the colonels. "House, hold on!" His voice carried over the gunfire. "We're coming!" But the Apache in the room heard him too. Their leader, a scared veteran with a Winchester rifle, positioned himself at the front door and began methodically aiming fire at anyone trying to approach the building. The rescue was so close Olivia could almost touch it, but the distance might as well have been miles. Marcus and his remaining men were pinned down outside, unable to advance against the concentrated fire from their own former sanctuary. That's when Olivia made the decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of cowering behind cover, she moved toward the front of the room, drawing fire away from the door where Marcus was trying to enter. The Apache leader swung his rifle toward her, and she found herself staring down the barrel of death with strange calm. She was no longer the frightened Philadelphia lady who'd stepped off the stagecoach days earlier. She was a frontier woman, Marcus Donnelly's partner, and she would not let him die outside while she hid inside. The rifle fired just as Marcus burst through the door behind the distracted warrior. The cavalry arrived like a blue thundercloud across the desert, dust billowing behind two full companies of mounted soldiers riding in perfect formation. Major William Garrett led the column, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the smoking ruins of Fort Brennan through his field glasses. "My God," he breathed, taking in the extent of the destruction. Nearly half the fort's buildings were damaged or destroyed, smoke still rising from several structures. Bodies of Apache warriors lay scattered throughout the compound, testament to the fierce resistance they'd encountered. The Apache war party had vanished into the desert with their characteristic efficiency, leaving behind only their dead and the devastation they'd wrought. They'd achieved their tactical goal of bloodying the army's nose, but the cost had been higher than anticipated. The fort's defenders had made them pay dearly for every foot of ground. Inside the colonel's house, the survivors were taking stock of their situation. Dr. Peterson moved among the wounded with quiet efficiency, treating injuries that ranged from bullet wounds to knife cuts to burns from the fires. His medical supplies were nearly exhausted, but his skill and dedication remained undiminished. "Final count," Marcus reported to Colonel Hayes, who'd sustained a shoulder wound but remained in command. 14 soldiers killed, 6 wounded but able to fight. Among civilians, 3 dead, 8 wounded. Could have been much worse. "The Apache?" Hayes asked. 23 confirmed dead, probably more wounded who were carried away. "They hit us with everything they had and paid a heavy price for it." Olivia sat on a wooden chair while Dr. Peterson cleaned and bandaged her shoulder wound. The bullet had passed cleanly through the muscle without striking bone or major blood vessels, but the damage was painful and would take weeks to heal properly. "You're lucky," the doctor said, securing the bandage with practiced movements. "Another inch to the right, and it would have shattered your collarbone. Another inch left, and it would have nicked the major artery." "Doesn't feel lucky," she replied, testing the range of motion in her arm. The pain was manageable now that the immediate crisis had passed, but she could tell it would be a constant companion for some time. "Lucky is relative out here," Dr. Peterson said with a slight smile. "Lucky means you're alive when the sun sets. Everything else is details." Major Garrett entered the building, his spurs ringing against the wooden floor. He was a man in his 50s with grey hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing as they surveyed the aftermath of the battle. "Captain Donnelly," he said, extending his hand, "heard about your defense from my scouts. Exceptional work under impossible circumstances." "My men deserve the credit, sir, and the civilians fought like veterans." Garrett's gaze fell on Olivia, taking in her bandaged shoulder and the blood-stained dress that marked her as a combatant rather than a helpless victim. "You must be the mail-order bride I heard about. Quite an introduction to frontier life." "More educational than I expected," she replied dryly, earning a chuckle from the Major. "I imagine so. From what I'm hearing, you acquitted yourself admirably during the fighting. Not many Eastern ladies would have shown such courage under fire." The comment sparked a realization that had been building in Olivia's mind throughout. In the afternoon, she was no longer an Eastern lady in any meaningful sense. The woman who'd worried about proper tea settings and social etiquette had died during the Apache attack, replaced by someone harder and more capable. "Major," Marcus interjected, "what brought you to Fort Brennan? We weren't expecting reinforcements." "Smoke signals from the Hendricks Ranch," Garrett explained. "They spotted the Apache war party moving toward the fort and managed to get word. To us at Fort Verde. We rode hard for 36 hours to get here. The revelation that help had been coming all along added a bitter irony to their desperate defense. If they'd known cavalry was approaching, they might have made different tactical decisions. But then again, if they'd fought less fiercely, they might not have survived long enough for the rescue to matter." Sarah Mitchell approached with a cup of coffee for Olivia, her own dress torn and stained from the battle. "Thought you might need this," she said. "It's going to be a long evening." "Thank you." Olivia accepted the coffee gratefully, the hot liquid helping to combat the shock that was setting in as the adrenaline faded. "How are the children?" "Frightened but unharmed. They're with Ellen, trying to make sense of what they witnessed today. Some of them have never seen violence like this before." It was a sobering reminder that the battle's effects would extend far, beyond the immediate casualties. Children who'd grown up feeling secure within the fort's walls had watched that security shattered in a few hours of concentrated violence. The psychological scars might last longer than the physical ones. "Major." Garrett was conferring with Colonel Hayes about the fort's future. The damage was extensive, but not fatal. Most of the essential buildings could be repaired, and the defensive walls remained intact. More importantly, the garrison had proven its ability to withstand a major assault, which would discourage future attacks. "We'll leave a company here to help with reconstruction," Garrett decided, "and I'll recommend that Washington increase the permanent garrison. 60 Apache warriors represents a significant escalation in the threat level." As evening approached, the work of cleaning up began in earnest. Bodies had to be buried, weapons collected, damaged equipment salvaged or discarded. The fires were finally brought under control, though several buildings would need complete rebuilding. Olivia found herself helping with the mundane tasks that followed violence, washing blood from walls, sorting through damaged possessions, preparing meals for exhausted defenders. The ordinary activities felt surreal after the morning's life and death struggle, but they served an important purpose in returning some semblance of normalcy to the shattered community. Marcus appeared at her side as she helped Sarah organize. Supplies in the temporary kitchen they'd set up outside the damaged commissary. His limp was more pronounced now that the immediate crisis had passed, and she could see exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. "Better than I expected," she replied honestly. "I keep waiting for the horror to hit me, for the reality of what I did today to overwhelm me, but it hasn't happened." "It might not," he said. "Some people are natural fighters. They find violence distasteful but not traumatic when it's necessary. For survival, is that what I am? A natural fighter?" Marcus studied her face in the flickering light of the cooking fires. "I think you're a natural survivor. You adapt to whatever circumstances require, whether that's managing a household in Philadelphia or fighting Apache warriors in Arizona territory." The observation felt accurate in a way that surprised her. She'd always thought of herself as fixed, in character and capability, but the frontier had revealed reserves of strength and adaptability she'd never suspected. Perhaps people were more malleable than she'd believed, shaped more by circumstances than by inherent nature. Chaplain Morrison approached them, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of strain from the day's events. "Captain, Miss Whitmore, I wanted to speak with you about your wedding plans. Given the circumstances, we'd like to proceed as soon as possible, Marcus said firmly. Today has shown us how uncertain life can be out here. We don't want to wait any longer than necessary. Tomorrow morning, the chaplain suggested, it would give people something positive to focus on after today's tragedy. Olivia nodded her agreement. The idea of a wedding celebration in the aftermath of violence might have seemed inappropriate in her previous life, but frontier communities understood the importance of affirming life in the face of death. Marriages, births, and other joyous occasions took on special significance when survival was never guaranteed. Nothing elaborate, she added. Just the ceremony itself. People have more important things to worry about than wedding festivities. I think you'll find people who want to celebrate, Chaplain Morrison said gently. After a day like today, the community needs to remember what we're fighting to protect. Love, family, the future. As if to prove his point, Ellen Hayes approached. With an armload of clothing? I thought you might need something to wear tomorrow, she said to Olivia. This dress belonged to my daughter before she married and moved back east. It should fit you well enough. The dress was simple but elegant, made of cream-colored silk with pearl buttons and delicate lace trim. It was clearly a treasured possession, and Ellen's willingness to share it represented the kind of generosity that characterized frontier communities. I can't accept such a valuable gift, Olivia protested. It's not a gift, it's a loan, but I hope you'll wear it with pride. After today, you've earned the right to be married in style. The preparations for the wedding proceeded with quiet efficiency throughout the evening. Someone found wildflowers that hadn't been trampled during the battle. The fort's small chapel was cleaned and arranged as well as circumstances allowed. Word spread through the surviving community, and people began making small contributions to the celebration despite their own losses and injuries. As night fell, Olivia found herself standing alone on the porch of the house she would soon officially share with Marcus. The desert air was cool and clean, carrying scents of sage and distant rain. Above her, stars began appearing in a sky so vast it made human concerns seem insignificant. But human concerns weren't insignificant, she realized. They were what gave meaning to existence in this harsh landscape. Love, family, community, the simple determination to build something lasting in the face of constant challenges. These things mattered precisely because they were fragile and hard-won. Marcus joined her on the porch, moving quietly despite his limp. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the cavalry camp where Major Garrett's men had established their temporary base. "Any regrets?" he asked eventually. She considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing poverty and social ruin in Philadelphia. Now she was a frontier fighter who'd killed 3 men and been wounded in battle, preparing to marry a man she'd known for less than a week. "None," she said finally. "Everything that brought me here, my father's debts, my desperate circumstances, even the Apache attack, it all led to this moment, to find who I really am and what I'm capable of." "And who are you really?" Olivia smiled, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "I'm your partner, your equal, someone who will stand beside you whatever comes, whether that's Apache raids, or prairie fires, or just the everyday challenges of building a life in this place." Marcus took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Then I'd say we're both exactly where we belong." In the distance, a coyote called across the desert darkness, its voice wild and free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new opportunities to test their strength and resolve. But tonight, they had each other and the knowledge that they'd face the worst the frontier could offer, and emerged not just alive, but stronger. The mail-order bride who'd arrived on the stagecoach was gone forever, transformed by fire into something. The territory respected, a frontier woman ready for whatever came next. Dawn broke over Fort Brennan with the kind of crystalline clarity that follows violent storms. The smoke had finally cleared from the compound, revealing the full extent of yesterday's destruction in harsh morning light. Blackened timbers marked where buildings had burned, scattered debris told the story of desperate fighting, and dark stains on the earth bore witness to blood spilled in defense of home and family. But the fort was alive. Soldiers moved with purpose. Despite their wounds, beginning the long process of rebuilding, civilians emerged from their shelters to assess damage and salvage what could be saved. Children's voices could be heard again, tentative at first, then growing stronger as they sensed the adults' determination to restore normalcy. Olivia woke in Ellen Hayes's guest room, where she'd spent the night to maintain propriety before her wedding. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, and her body ached from the previous day's violence, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. The woman who tossed restlessly in a Philadelphia boarding house, worried about rent and reputation, seemed like a stranger from another lifetime. "Good morning, bride," Ellen said softly from the doorway, carrying a tray with coffee and biscuits. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Olivia replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I thought I'd have nightmares about the fighting, but instead I dreamed about gardens and children playing." The mind protects itself sometimes. The horror will probably hit you later, when you have time to process everything that happened. But for now, your body is focused on healing and moving forward. Ellen had laid out the cream silk dress on a chair, along with undergarments and a pair of shoes that looked like they might fit. Simple wildflowers in a water glass served as a bouquet, prairie roses and Indian paintbrush that had somehow survived the battle undamaged. "Are you nervous?" Ellen asked as she helped Olivia dress, careful of the wounded shoulder. "About the wedding? No. About marriage to Marcus? Not anymore." Olivia winced as the dress sleeve settled over her bandaged arm. "Yesterday showed me who he really is when everything's on the line. I couldn't ask for a better partner. And he saw who you really are. Not many men would be comfortable with a wife who can fight beside them in battle." The observation struck Olivia as fundamentally important. Marcus hadn't been diminished or threatened by her display of competence and courage. Instead, he'd seemed proud and relieved to discover she was stronger than either of them had expected. That acceptance of her full capabilities felt like a gift beyond price. Through the window, she could see activity around the small chapel. Despite everything they'd endured, people were preparing for a celebration. Sergeant Murphy had found time to wash his dress uniform. Sarah Mitchell was arranging wildflowers around the altar. Even some of Major Garrett's cavalry troopers were polishing their boots and brushing dust from their blues. "Why are they doing this?" Olivia asked, moved by the sight. "They have so much work to do, so many problems to solve. Why spend time on a wedding? Because that's what makes us human instead of just survivors." Ellen replied simply. "The Apache want to drive us out, make us abandon this place and everything we've built. Having a wedding today, celebrating love and commitment and hope for the future, that's our way of saying they haven't won." The logic was both practical and profound. Communities survived not just through military strength, but through the bonds that made survival worthwhile. Marriages, births, festivals, and other rituals of normal life served as anchors of meaning in chaotic times. Dr. Peterson arrived to check Olivia's wound, his medical bag noticeably lighter after treating yesterday's casualties. "Healing well," he pronounced after examining her shoulder. "Keep the arm immobilized for another week, then gentle movement to prevent stiffness. You'll have a scar, but it shouldn't limit your range of motion. Will it hurt for long? A few weeks for the worst pain, a few months before you stop noticing it entirely. But scars tell stories. This one will remind you of the day you discovered what you're truly made of." As the morning progressed, Olivia found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a respectable spinster facing genteel poverty in Philadelphia. 3 days ago, she'd been a terrified passenger on a stagecoach, wondering if she'd made the worst mistake of her life. Now she was preparing to marry a man she'd known for less than a week in a fort that still reeked of gunpowder and smoke, surrounded by people who'd seen her kill 3 human beings in desperate combat. And she'd never been happier or more certain of her path. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 10 o'clock, giving everyone time to complete the most urgent repairs and clean-up. Olivia spent the intervening hours helping where she could, despite her injured arm, organizing supplies, comforting frightened children, and generally making herself useful in the way frontier communities expected from everyone. Marcus appeared around 9:30, wearing his dress uniform, with the creases pressed sharp despite yesterday's chaos. Someone had found time to clean and oil his leather gear, and his boots gleamed with fresh polish. The effect was impressive. He looked every inch the professional soldier, competent and reliable. But Olivia could see the signs of strain that others might miss. The way he favored his injured leg more than usual, the careful movements that spoke of wounds and exhaustion, the lines around his eyes that came from commanding men in life-and-death situations. "You look beautiful," he said simply, taking her uninjured hand in his. "You look tired," she replied with equal honesty. "When did you last sleep?" "I'll sleep when the fort is secure and my wife is properly married." His smile took any sting from the words. "Besides, I have the rest of my life to sleep. I only get to marry you once." They walked together toward the chapel, followed by most of the fort's population. Even the wounded who could travel had made the effort to attend, supported by friends, or carried on stretchers. Major Garrett's cavalry had formed an honor guard, their sabers glinting in the morning sun. The chapel itself was small and simple, built from local stone with a wooden cross carved by some long-departed soldier. Wildflowers decorated the altar, and someone had managed to find candles despite the previous day's destruction. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the warm air. Chaplain Morrison stood at the altar in his dress uniform, his Bible open to the marriage service. His face bore the marks of yesterday's ordeal, but his voice was strong and confident as he called the gathering to order. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to join Marcus Donnelly and Olivia Whitmore in holy matrimony." The familiar words took on special meaning in their current circumstances. This wasn't just a legal contract or social ceremony. It was a public declaration of commitment in the face of uncertainty and danger. Everyone present understood the stakes involved in frontier marriage, the daily risks that could separate couples without warning. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Chaplain Morrison continued, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Olivia found herself thinking about those purposes as the ceremony proceeded. Companionship in a lonely world, mutual support through hardship, the creation of families that would carry civilization forward into the wilderness, the transformation of individual survival into something larger and more meaningful. "Marcus," the chaplain said, "do you take Olivia to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" "Do," Marcus replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. His eyes never left Olivia's face, and she could see the depth of feeling behind his simple words. "Olivia, do you take Marcus to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" "I do," she answered, meaning it more completely than she'd ever meant anything in her life. The ring Marcus slipped onto her finger was simple gold, probably purchased from the sutler's limited stock. But it felt warm and solid against her skin, a tangible symbol of the bond they were forging. She had no ring for him. Frontier practicality often dispensed with such niceties, but the commitment was no less real for the absence of ceremony. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle and brief, appropriate for a public ceremony, but carrying the promise of deeper intimacy to come. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Olivia felt a profound sense of completion, as if a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. The reception was necessarily simple. Coffee and cake served outside the chapel, with toasts, offered in tin cups instead of crystal glasses, but the warmth and genuine affection from the community made it more meaningful than any elaborate Philadelphia society wedding could have been. To Marcus and Olivia, Major Garrett said, raising his cup in the first toast, may your marriage be blessed with the same courage and strength you showed yesterday in defense of your home. Other toasts followed, each reflecting the unique perspective of frontier life. Dr. Peterson wished them wounds that heal quickly and children who stay healthy. Sergeant Murphy hoped they would always have ammunition when they need it, and peace when they don't. Sarah Mitchell offered the simple blessing that they would grow old together and die in their sleep. As the celebration continued around them, Marcus and Olivia found a quiet moment together under the shade of a cottonwood tree. The sounds of reconstruction filled the air, hammering, sawing, the scrape of shovels as debris was cleared away. Life was reasserting itself with stubborn determination. Any regrets now? Marcus asked, echoing his question from the night before. Only that it took an Apache raid to bring us together properly, Olivia replied. Though I suppose that's fitting. Nothing about frontier life is easy or conventional. It won't get easier, he warned. There will be other raids, other dangers, harsh winters when supplies run low, diseases that take people we care about, the constant uncertainty of never knowing what each day will bring. I know, but we'll face it together as equals. That makes all the difference. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their new community begin the process of rebuilding. Children played among the workers, their laughter a defiant assertion of normalcy. Women organized supplies and planned meals. Men measured timber and calculated what materials would be needed for repairs. This was her life now, not the genteel poverty she'd fled in Philadelphia, but something harder and more honest, a place where people were judged by their actions rather than their ancestry, where strength of character mattered more than social position, where a mail-order bride could become a respected member of the community by proving her worth in battle. I love you, she said, suddenly, surprising herself with the words. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. Are you sure? We've known each other for such a short time, under such extraordinary circumstances. I'm sure. Not the romantic love from fairy tales, but something deeper, partnership love, the kind that gets stronger with time and shared hardship. Then I love you too, he replied, his hand finding hers. And I have a feeling we're going to have a very interesting marriage. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Olivia realized that her transformation was complete. The frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach was gone forever, replaced by someone strong enough to survive and thrive in this demanding land. She was no longer Olivia Whitmore of Philadelphia, dependent on others for her survival and security. She was Olivia Donnelly of Fort Brennan, Arizona Territory, wife, fighter, and full partner in whatever adventures the frontier might offer. The Apache had given her the ultimate test, and she had passed it, earning her place in this harsh but honest world through courage and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The mail-order bride had found her true home at last. 6 months later, Olivia Donnelly stood at the window of her adobe home, watching the Arizona sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Her left shoulder bore a thin scar that caught the light, a permanent reminder of the day she'd discovered who she truly was. The woman looking back at her from the glass was tanned by desert sun, strengthened by frontier labor, and possessed of a quiet confidence that would have seemed impossible to her former self. The fort had been rebuilt stronger than before. New walls rose higher, defensive positions were better positioned, and additional buildings housed the enlarged garrison that Washington had finally approved. What the Apache raid had destroyed in violence, the community had restored through determination and unity, but the changes went deeper than architecture and military strength. The people themselves had been transformed by their shared ordeal, bound together by the knowledge that they'd faced the worst the frontier could offer and survived through mutual support. They were no longer just a collection of soldiers and civilians occupying the same space. They were a true community, tested by fire and proven unbreakable. Olivia's own transformation remained the most dramatic. The desperate Philadelphia spinster existed only in memory now, replaced by a woman who could split firewood with an axe, tend gunshot wounds without flinching, and make decisions that affected the welfare of others. She'd earned the respect of everyone at Fort Brennan, not through social connections or inherited status, but through proven competence under the harshest possible circumstances. "Coffee's ready," Marcus called from the kitchen, his voice carrying the contentment of a man who'd found happiness in unexpected places. Their marriage had deepened with each passing day, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared challenges. They'd faced harsh weather, supply shortages, and 2 more Apache raids, smaller affairs that the strengthened garrison had repelled with relative ease. "Coming," she replied, turning away from the window with a smile. These quiet, morning moments had become precious to her, stolen time before the day's responsibilities claimed their attention. As the captain's wife, she'd assumed unofficial leadership among the fort's women, organizing everything from medical care to education for the children. Marcus stood at the stove, still favoring his injured leg, but moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own home. He'd grown a fuller beard over the winter months, and his hair showed new threads of grey at the temples, marks of command responsibility and the weight of keeping others safe. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Better than I. Used to in Philadelphia," she replied truthfully. "Funny how exhaustion from honest work leads to better rest than worrying about bills and social obligations." They sat together at the small table Marcus had crafted during the long winter evenings, sharing the comfortable silence of couples who no longer needed constant conversation to feel connected. Through the window, they could see the fort coming to life, soldiers beginning their morning routines, women tending gardens, children emerging to play before the day grew too hot. "Major Garrett's arriving today," Marcus mentioned, referring to the monthly visits that kept Fort Brennan connected to the larger military command structure. "He's bringing news from territorial headquarters. Good news or bad news? With the Army, it's usually both, but I suspect he's coming to discuss my promotion recommendations. Colonel Hayes put several of our men up for advancement after their performance during the siege." Olivia felt a flutter of pride at the mention. Marcus had transformed the fort's defensive capabilities through intensive training and tactical improvements. More importantly, he'd created a culture where soldiers and civilians worked together as a unified force rather than separate groups. "Sharing the same space. What about your own promotion prospects?" she asked. Marcus shrugged, though she could see the ambition in his eyes. "Major's rank might be possible eventually, but I'm content here building something that matters. Some officers spend their careers moving from post to post, never staying long enough to make a real difference. I'd rather make Fort Brennan the best frontier installation in the territory." His words reflected a philosophy that Olivia had come to share. The idea that meaningful achievement came from depth rather than breadth, from committing fully to a place and people rather than constantly seeking advancement elsewhere. Philadelphia. Society had emphasized climbing social ladders, but frontier life taught the value of putting down roots and nurturing growth. After breakfast, they walked together through the fort's morning routines. Marcus reviewed overnight reports with Sergeant Davis, now promoted to first sergeant after his heroic actions during the Apache raid. Olivia checked on Mrs. Henderson, who was recovering from pneumonia with the help of improved medical supplies Dr. Peterson had requested from territorial headquarters. The fort school had grown to accommodate 18 children, requiring the construction of a larger classroom building. Mary Crawford had married Corporal Williams during the winter, creating the kind of personal connections that strengthened community bonds. Even Dr. Peterson had found romance, courting the widow Thompson, with a persistence that amused everyone except the couple themselves. "It's remarkable," Olivia observed to Sarah Mitchell as they organized supplies in the expanded commissary. "6 months ago we were just surviving, now we're thriving." "That's what happens when people stop thinking about this as a temporary assignment and start seeing it as home," Sarah replied. "The Apache raid did more than test our defenses. It forced everyone to choose whether they truly belonged here." The observation struck Olivia as profoundly accurate. The attack had been a crucible that burned away uncertainty and pretense, leaving only those genuinely committed to frontier life. The few who couldn't handle the reality had transferred to safer posts, while those who remained had embraced their chosen home with fierce loyalty. Major Garrett arrived with his usual small cavalry escort just before noon, dust rising from their horses as they approached the main gate. But this time he brought additional passengers, a small group of civilians who looked distinctly out of place in the desert environment. "Inspection team from Washington," Marcus explained to Olivia as they watched the arrivals from their porch. "Territorial officials want to assess our reconstruction efforts and determine future funding levels." The visitors were clearly Eastern bureaucrats, their clothing and demeanor marking them as unfamiliar with frontier realities. Olivia felt a strange mix of recognition and alienation watching them. They represented the world she'd left behind, but that world now seemed as foreign as if it belonged to a different century. The inspection proceeded over the next 2 days, with the officials examining everything from defensive fortifications to medical facilities to educational programs. Olivia found herself serving as an unofficial guide, explaining how frontier communities adapted Eastern institutions to local needs and challenges. "Remarkable transformation," observed Mr. Harrison, the lead inspector, after touring the school and medical facility. "When I read the initial reports about the Apache attack, I expected to find a demoralized garrison barely hanging on. Instead, I see a thriving community that's clearly committed to permanent settlement. The attack taught us what we were capable of," Olivia explained, "both individually and collectively. People discovered strengths they didn't know they possessed. And you, Mrs. Donnelly, how has frontier life compared to your expectations?" The question required careful consideration. How could she explain the magnitude of her transformation to someone who still lived in the world of social conventions and inherited status that had once constrained her own life? "I expected hardship and found purpose," she said finally. "I expected to survive and discovered I could thrive. Most importantly, I expected to remain essentially the same person and learned that people are far more adaptable than I'd imagined." That evening, Major Garrett joined the Donnellys for dinner, bringing news from the wider territory and the nation beyond. The Indian Wars were gradually winding down as more tribes accepted reservation life. Railroad construction was approaching. Arizona, promising to connect frontier communities to national markets and culture. Statehood discussions were beginning in territorial capitals, though actual admission to the Union remained years away. "Change is coming whether we want it or not," Garrett observed over coffee and Sarah Mitchell's excellent apple pie. "The question is whether places like Fort Brennan will adapt successfully or be swept aside by progress." "We'll adapt," Marcus said with quiet confidence. "This community has proven its resilience. Whatever changes come, we'll find ways to preserve what matters while embracing what's beneficial." Olivia nodded her agreement, though privately she wondered what those changes might mean for the tight-knit community they'd built. Would railroad connections and territorial development preserve Fort Brennan's unique character? Or would progress dilute the bonds forged through shared hardship? The inspection team departed the following morning with what appeared to be favorable impressions. Their final report, Major Garrett assured Marcus, would likely recommend continued support for Fort Brennan's expansion and development. The community had successfully demonstrated its viability and strategic importance. As life returned to normal routines, Olivia found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a desperate woman with no apparent future, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Now she was a respected member of a thriving community, married to a man she loved and admired, playing a vital role in building something lasting and meaningful. The transformation hadn't been easy or comfortable. She bore physical scars from the Apache attack and emotional scars from the violence she'd witnessed and participated in. The genteel refinements of her Eastern upbringing had been stripped away, replaced by practical skills and hard-earned wisdom about survival and community building. But she wouldn't trade her current life for any alternative, including a return to the Philadelphia society that had once seemed so important. The frontier had demanded everything from her: courage, adaptability, physical and emotional strength, and in return had given her an identity that felt authentic and earned rather than inherited or assigned. That afternoon, while Marcus conducted training exercises with the garrison, Olivia walked alone to the small cemetery where those killed in the Apache raid rested beneath simple wooden crosses. She came here sometimes to remember the price that had been paid for their community's survival and growth. "Thank you," she said quietly to the graves. "You gave your lives defending something worth preserving. We won't forget that sacrifice, or let it be meaningless." The words were both a promise and a prayer, a commitment to honor the dead by building the kind of community they died protecting. A place where people could pursue their dreams free from the constraints that had once limited their possibilities. A frontier community that balanced individual opportunity with collective responsibility. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert landscape in familiar shades of gold and red, Olivia felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She'd found her place in the world, not the place she'd been born to or the one society had assigned her, but the one she'd chosen and earned through courage and determination. The mail-order bride who'd arrived on a dusty stagecoach had completed her transformation into something the frontier respected, a true pioneer woman, tested by hardship and proven equal to whatever challenges lay ahead. Whatever changes the future might bring to Fort Brennan and the territory beyond, she would meet them with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The desert wind carried the sounds of her adopted home. Children's laughter, the ring of Sergeant Murphy's hammer on his anvil, Marcus's voice giving instructions to his soldiers. These were the sounds of civilization being built from scratch through courage, determination, and community spirit. And Olivia Donnelly, formerly Olivia Whitmore of Philadelphia, was proud to be part of it all. 2 years after the Apache raid that had transformed her life, Olivia Donnelly stood in the doorway of Fort Brennan's new schoolhouse, watching her 8-year-old daughter Emma help younger children with their letters. The sight filled her with the kind of deep satisfaction that came from witnessing the future taking shape through present efforts. Emma had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, but her spirit was entirely her own, curious, fearless, and already showing the independence that frontier life demanded. She moved between her younger classmates with natural authority, offering encouragement and correction in equal measure. "She's going to be trouble," Marcus observed, appearing beside Olivia with the quiet step that still surprised people who expected his limp to announce his approach. "Smart as her mother, and stubborn as both of us combined." "Good," Olivia replied, not taking her eyes off their daughter. "This territory needs strong women who can think for themselves and stand up for what's right." The schoolhouse itself represented one of Fort Brennan's greatest achievements. Built from local stone with glass windows shipped from Santa Fe, it accommodated 32 children and served as a community center for evening meetings and social gatherings. Mary Williams, formerly Crawford, had proven herself an exceptional teacher, preparing frontier children not just for survival, but for leadership in the territory's evolving future. Fort Brennan had grown far beyond its original military purpose. The railroad's arrival 18 months earlier had transformed the isolated outpost into a regional hub, bringing regular mail service, reliable supply lines, and connection to national markets for local ranchers and merchants. The town that had sprouted around the fort now boasted a bank, a hotel, 2 general stores, and a weekly newspaper that Marcus edited in his spare time. But growth had brought challenges along with opportunities. The tight-knit community forged by shared hardship had to adapt to an influx of newcomers who hadn't shared their formative experiences. Some arrivals brought Eastern attitudes about social hierarchy and women's roles that clashed with frontier egalitarianism. Others viewed the established residents as provincial and backward, lacking proper appreciation for civilized refinements. Olivia had found herself at the center of these cultural tensions, serving as an unofficial ambassador between old and new Fort Brennan. Her background allowed her to understand both perspectives, while her proven competence commanded respect from all factions. She'd organized women's clubs that bridged social divisions, mediated disputes between longtime residents and newcomers, and quietly but firmly established standards of behavior that preserved community values while accommodating necessary changes. "Mrs. Donnelly," called out Mrs. Catherine Reynolds, the banker's wife who'd arrived on the morning train. She approached with the determined stride of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer persistence. "I wonder if we might discuss the upcoming territorial governor's visit. I have some concerns about our current arrangements." Catherine Reynolds represented the new Fort Brennan in concentrated form, educated, ambitious, and possessed of firm opinions about how frontier communities should evolve. She'd arrived expecting to find primitive conditions and backward people, then been surprised to discover a sophisticated society that simply operated by different rules than those she'd known back east. "Of course," Olivia replied diplomatically. "What specific concerns do you have?" "Well, the reception committee has planned an outdoor barbecue with fiddle music and square dancing. I worry this might give Governor Morrison the wrong impression about our community's cultural development. Perhaps something more refined would be appropriate, a formal dinner with proper music and civilized conversation." The suggestion embodied exactly the kind of cultural collision that Olivia had learned to navigate carefully. Catherine Reynolds meant well, but she didn't understand that the primitive customs of Fort Brennan actually represented sophisticated adaptations to frontier conditions. Outdoor gatherings weren't signs of cultural poverty, but practical responses to desert heat and limited indoor space. Fiddle music and square dancing weren't evidence of backwardness, but expressions of community spirit that included everyone regardless of social background. "I appreciate your concern," Olivia said carefully, "but Governor Morrison specifically requested an authentic frontier experience. He's been to plenty of formal dinners in Santa Fe and Tucson. What he wants to see here is how successful frontier communities actually function. But surely we want to show our best face to territorial leadership, demonstrate that we're ready for the responsibilities of statehood." "We are ready," Marcus interjected, having overheard the conversation. "But not by pretending to be something we're not. Fort Brennan's strength comes from our ability to blend the best of Eastern civilization with frontier practicality. Governor Morrison needs to see that combination in action." The discussion that followed illustrated the broader challenges facing Fort Brennan as it evolved from isolated outpost to regional center. How much should they adapt to accommodate new residents and changing circumstances? How could they preserve the community spirit forged through shared hardship while embracing the opportunities that growth provided? These weren't just local questions. They reflected the broader transformation occurring throughout the American West as the frontier era gradually gave way to territorial development and eventual statehood. Communities everywhere faced similar choices about how to balance tradition with progress, local identity with national integration. That evening, Olivia and Marcus walked their familiar route along the fort's expanded perimeter, now encompassing not just military facilities, but the growing civilian town beyond. Their conversation naturally turned to the changes they'd witnessed and their hopes for the future. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of the early days?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the bustling main street where electric lights had recently been installed, when everyone knew everyone else and we all shared the same basic challenges. "Sometimes," Olivia admitted. "There was something pure about those days, clear purposes, direct relationships, no ambiguity about what mattered most. But I don't think we can go back, even if we wanted to. Nor should we. Progress brings complications, but it also brings opportunities. Emma will have choices we never had, education beyond what frontier schools can provide, careers that didn't exist when we arrived here, the chance to help build something even larger than what we've created." They paused at the cemetery where the Apache raid victims rested beneath headstones that had replaced the original wooden crosses. Additional graves marked the passage of time, some from natural causes, others from accidents and occasional violence, that remained part of frontier life. But many more names appeared on the birth records than the death rolls, testament to a community that was growing and thriving despite its challenges. "I've been thinking about writing our story," Olivia said. "Suddenly, the whole experience, from my arrival as a mail-order bride through the Apache raid and everything that's followed. Not for publication necessarily, but to preserve the truth about what really happened here." Marcus considered the idea seriously. It would be valuable historically. Too many frontier stories get romanticized or simplified until they bear no resemblance to the actual experience. Exactly. I want Emma and her children to understand what it really took to build this place, the fear and courage, the mistakes and achievements, the ordinary people who did extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. The conversation was interrupted by shouts from the direction of the railroad station. They could see people running toward the platform, where the evening train from Santa Fe had apparently brought unexpected news or visitors. Marcus and Olivia joined the crowd, gathering around a man in a territorial marshal's uniform who was speaking urgently to Colonel Hayes. "Apache uprising near Fort Apache," the marshal was explaining. Geronimo broke out of the reservation with about 30 warriors. They've hit several ranches and may be heading this direction. The news sent a chill through the assembled crowd. Most had assumed the Indian Wars were essentially over, with the major Apache leaders either dead or confined to reservations. Geronimo's name carried a particular menace. He was perhaps the most skilled and dangerous Apache war leader still alive. "What's the military response?" Marcus asked, automatically thinking in tactical terms despite his current civilian status. "General Crook mobilized every available unit, but it'll take time to coordinate the search, and Geronimo knows this country better than anyone. He could hit targets for weeks before we corner him." Colonel Hayes turned to address the crowd. "We'll implement full defensive measures immediately. All outlying ranches should consider moving into town temporarily. The fort's defenses will be strengthened, and we'll organize civilian militias like we did during the siege." As the crowd dispersed to spread news and begin preparations, Olivia felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination settling over her. The Apache raid 2 years earlier had been terrifying but also transformative, revealing capabilities she'd never suspected in herself and others. If another crisis was approaching, she would meet it with the confidence that came from proven experience. "Are you worried?" Marcus asked as they walked home through streets now buzzing with activity. "Not worried, concerned," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "We know what we're capable of when we work together, but Emma and the other children have never experienced anything like what we went through. They'll need guidance and protection. They'll also need to see strength and courage from the adults they look up to. If we panic, they'll panic. If we remain calm and determined, they'll learn to do the same." Over the following days, Fort Brennan transformed once again into a defensive position. Outlying families moved into town for protection. Weapons were gleaned and ammunition stockpiled. Guard schedules were organized and patrol routes established. The community that had grown comfortable with peaceful prosperity rediscovered the vigilance that frontier life ultimately required. But there were differences from the previous crisis. The population was larger now, including many people without combat experience. The defensive preparations were more sophisticated, benefiting from lessons learned and improved resources. Most importantly, the community faced the threat with the confidence that came from having survived similar challenges before. Olivia found herself once again helping organize civilian aspects of the defense: food preparation, medical supplies, care for children and elderly residents who needed special protection. But this time, she worked with experienced partners who knew their roles and could execute them without detailed supervision. It's remarkable how naturally everyone's falling back into crisis mode, Sarah Mitchell observed as they organized emergency medical supplies. "Like putting on familiar clothes after years in a closet. We learned something important about ourselves during the siege," Olivia replied. "That knowledge doesn't disappear just because life gets more comfortable." The crisis passed without direct confrontation. Geronimo's band moved through the territory like ghosts, striking isolated targets and disappearing before military units could respond. But they never approached Fort Brennan, perhaps recognizing that the community was too well prepared and defended to offer easy targets. After 2 weeks of heightened alert, word came that Geronimo had been cornered and captured in Mexico, ending his final campaign of resistance. The threat was over, but its brief return had served as a valuable reminder that frontier life still required constant readiness for unexpected challenges. "We passed another test," Marcus observed, as defensive measures were gradually relaxed. "Not just the test of preparing for danger, but the test of maintaining our community character while adapting to growth and change." Olivia nodded, understanding what he meant. The crisis had revealed that Fort Brennan's essential spirit remained intact despite 2 years of rapid development. When faced with external threat, old residents and newcomers had worked together, effectively, proving that the community's values could survive and incorporate change rather than being destroyed by it. Standing once again at her window as sunrise painted the desert mountains, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightened mail-order bride seemed like a character from someone else's story now, though her influence remained in the choices and values that shaped Olivia's current life. She had become exactly what the frontier demanded: strong, adaptable, committed to community welfare, and capable of facing whatever challenges might arise. But more than that, she had become someone she could respect and admire, someone whose story was worth preserving for future generations who would face their own tests and transformations. The desert wind carried familiar sounds. Emma's laughter as she played with friends, Marcus's voice discussing business with visitors, the everyday activities of a thriving community. These were the sounds of civilization successfully planted in wilderness, of dreams transformed into reality through courage and persistence. Olivia Donnelly, formerly Whitmore of Philadelphia, had found her place in the world and helped others find theirs. The mail-order bride's journey was complete, but the frontier woman's story would continue as long as there were new challenges to meet and new generations to guide into the future. Whatever came next, she would face it with the confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.